was told to leave my own family home in the middle of Christmas dinner, and for a moment, I actually believed that was the worst thing that could happen that night. It turned out it was only the beginning, because 5 minutes later, the same people who told me never to come back were chasing me out the door, begging me to undo something they didn't even realize. I had been quietly holding over their heads for years. I didn't even get to finish my food. My plate was still warm gravy sliding slowly toward the edge like it had somewhere better to be, and my fork was frozen in my hand as if it had forgotten its purpose. My daughter Lily, only 7 years old, sat beside me with her small shoulders pulled in, carefully picking at her dinner and counting peas under her breath the way children do when they sense tension but don't understand it. Music. Around us, my sister Vanessa's kids were loud and carefree, talking over each other and making a mess never once corrected. Music, and while Lily stayed silent, already trained by experience to take up as little space as possible. Across the table, music. Vanessa wore a smile that looked polished and rehearsed, the kind of expression that tries to pass as kindness but carries something colder underneath. Her husband Tyler sat next to her, nodding at everything without really listening. On music, and the kind of man who drifted through life like background noise. My mother dabbed at her lips with a napkin as if she were hosting some elegant gathering instead of presiding over a quiet, emotional execution, while my father stared down at his plate, avoiding eye contact like it might force him to participate in reality. The tension had been building all evening in small, sharp comments that were easy to dismiss individually but impossible to ignore together. My mother had greeted me by pointing out how tired I looked, as if exhaustion were a personal failure. Vanessa had commented on Lily's dress with a tone that suggested it wasn't good enough, as though a child needed to impress anyone. Tyler had casually asked if I was still struggling financially, the question delivered with a polite smile that made it feel like a judgment disguised as concern. I smiled through all of it because it was Christmas, because my daughter was watching, and because I had spent most of my life convincing myself that enduring this behavior was the same thing as keeping the peace. Then Vanessa set her fork down in a way that instantly changed the air in the room. Her voice was calm, music, controlled, and far too prepared when she said we needed to talk. My stomach dropped, not because I was surprised, but because I had always known this moment was coming. It was the kind of conversation where I wasn't allowed to feel anything without being labeled dramatic, the kind where the outcome had already been decided before I was even included. She leaned back slightly, folding her hands as if she were about to deliver a verdict, and said that it had all become too much. The music. That our parents agreed, and that it would be best if I left and never came back. The words landed with a strange kind of clarity, like something she had practiced until it sounded almost reasonable. My mother immediately followed with a softer version of the same cruelty, saying that Christmas felt better without me, her tone gentle enough to pretend it wasn't devastating. I looked at my father, hoping for something. Anything, even the smallest interruption that might suggest he disagreed. For a second he met my eyes, and I thought he might speak, but then he looked away again. The music in choosing silence over truth. That silence hurt more than the words, because it confirmed what I had always suspected, but never fully accepted. Beside music, I felt Lily's hand tighten around her fork, and something inside me shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet, like something finally breaking after years of pressure. I realized I had spent my entire life trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided I didn't belong. In that moment, I stopped trying. I set my fork down carefully and turned to Lily, keeping my voice gentle, so she wouldn't feel the weight of what was happening. I told her to go get her coat and her backpack because we were leaving. She didn't argue or ask questions. She simply nodded and slipped out of her chair, walking toward the hallway with a kind of quiet readiness that made my chest tighten, because it meant this wasn't new to her. As soon as she disappeared from view, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Vanessa crossed her arms with satisfaction. Tyler let out a small breath, like a problem had just been solved. Music. And my mother told me not to make things harder than they needed to be. I looked at all of them and felt something unexpected rise to the surface. I smiled. Music, not warmly, not kindly, but with the clarity of someone who finally sees the truth. I told them they didn't need to worry, and then I said that if they truly wanted me gone, they wouldn't mind what I was about to do. They watched me expectantly, clearly assuming I was about to argue or cry or create a scene. Instead, I walked calmly into the kitchen and opened a cabinet where I had hidden 3 envelopes earlier that day. Each envelope had a name written on it in bold letters. Music. One for my mother, one for my father, and one for Vanessa. When I brought them back into the dining room, music, their reactions ranged from confusion to mild amusement. My mother even laughed. Music, asking what I thought I was doing, as if I had suddenly become ridiculous in her eyes. I didn't explain. I simply picked up the envelope with my mother's name and tore it cleanly down the middle. The sound of paper ripping echoed in the room in a way that felt far louder than it should have. Her smile faltered immediately. Music, right, replaced by uncertainty. I moved on to the next one, tearing my father's envelope with the same slow, deliberate motion, watching as his expression tightened for the first time all evening. Vanessa started to protest, her voice rising with irritation, but I didn't stop. I tore her envelope last without hesitation and placed the pieces neatly on the counter. For a moment no one spoke. The silence was thick, heavy, and confused. Tyler laughed awkwardly, trying to dismiss what had just happened, and Vanessa snapped that I was proving their point. My mother shook her head like she was witnessing something embarrassing, saying this behavior was exactly why they had made their decision. I didn't argue with them. I did music. I didn't defend myself. I simply turned and walked toward the hallway. Lily was already waiting, her coat on and her backpack slung over her shoulder. I took her hand, told her we were leaving, and together we walked out into the cold night air. The chill hit my face sharply, but it felt clean, almost refreshing compared to the suffocating atmosphere inside. As we stepped off the porch, I glanced back through the window without meaning to. I saw them gathered around the counter, picking up the torn pieces of paper. At first their expressions were curious, then confused, and then something changed. Their faces lost color. Music. Their movements became frantic, and I could see them trying to piece the documents back together like a puzzle they suddenly realized mattered. A second later, the front door burst open behind me. Music Neskin, I heard my name shouted in a way I had never heard before, filled with urgency and panic. Footsteps rushed toward me as Vanessa called out for me to wait, her voice high and strained. My mother followed, pleading, her tone cracking as she begged me to come back. My father's voice joined theirs, no longer quiet or distant, but desperate music telling me to stop and talk, to reconsider. I opened the car door and helped Lily inside, then paused for a moment, looking at all of them standing there. In the cold, their faces completely transformed from what they had been just minutes earlier. 5 minutes ago they had told me I didn't belong. Now they were begging me to undo something they couldn't even bring themselves to say out loud. I got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away without responding. The truth is, those envelopes weren't just symbolic. A music sign inside them were documents that changed everything. For years, my husband Michael and I had quietly supported my parents, financially sending money every single month without recognition or gratitude. Music after Michael died in a workplace accident that should never have happened. I fought a long legal battle that finally ended in a settlement, large enough to secure my daughter's future. Those envelopes contained proof of that settlement, music, along with legal agreements that would have given my family access to continued financial support, something I had still been willing to offer despite everything. But when they told me to leave, music, when they made it clear I was nothing more than a burden, I realized they didn't deserve even that. By tearing those papers in front of them, I wasn't just destroying documents, I was cutting the last tie that allowed them to benefit from me, while treating me like I didn't matter. As I drove away that night, Lily reached over and held my hand, her small fingers warm against mine. She didn't ask questions and she didn't need explanations. For the first time, music, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, something stronger than anger or sadness. I felt free.